The receipt was in the wrong jacket. That's how it started. Not with a confrontation, not with a discovered phone, not with the kind of scene people imagine when they picture a marriage ending. It started with a dry cleaning run and a folded piece of paper that had migrated from Serena's coat into mine when I grabbed the wrong jacket off the hallway hook on a Tuesday morning in November. I didn't open it in the moment. I'm a forensic accountant, I work with documents every day, and nothing in my professional training has made me dramatic about paper. I tucked it into my shirt pocket, drove to the office, spent the morning reviewing a client's expense irregularities, and it wasn't until I reached for a pen around 11 and found the receipt instead that I actually looked at it. Nordstrom. October 28, $312.47. A wallet. Men's. Tumi brand. Full grain leather, carbon fiber detail, RFID blocking. The kind of wallet I would have noticed if it had appeared anywhere in our house. The kind of wallet that had not appeared in our house, because I notice objects. It's part of how my mind is organized. The cataloging of things, their placement, their presence or absence. My birthday was in September. Our anniversary in June. Christmas was still 7 weeks out, which made early gift plausible. Except the receipt was dated October 28 and today was November 12 and I had not seen a Tumi wallet anywhere, not in a gift bag, not tucked in a closet, not sitting half-wrapped on a shelf somewhere waiting for December. I set the receipt on my desk and looked at it. I am 44 years old. I have been married to Serena for 14 years. We have a daughter named Cassie who is 14, plays varsity tennis, has her mother's cheekbones and my stubbornness in roughly equal measure. We live in a 4-bedroom house in Naperville with a 3-car garage and a backyard that opens onto a small nature preserve. By most external measures, we had built exactly the life we said we were going to build when we stood in front of 80 guests at the Palmer House in Chicago and made the promises that people make when they still believe promises are enough. I put the receipt back in my shirt pocket. Finished my coffee. Returned to the expense reports. But something had already shifted, quietly, without announcement, the way a fracture forms in load-bearing material long before the crack reaches the surface. I did not ask Serena about the receipt that evening. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. What I didn't admit, not yet, not directly, was that I already sensed there was no version of the right moment that would produce a satisfying explanation. So, I said nothing. I ate dinner. I asked Cassie about the match on Saturday. I poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to my wife and watched her talk about a campaign pitch her team had been grinding through all week, and the receipt sat in my jacket pocket on the hook by the door like a small, patient fact waiting for someone to deal with it. That night, after Serena was asleep, I went downstairs to the kitchen and opened my laptop. Not to investigate, not yet. Just to think. I'm an accountant. When something doesn't add up, the correct response is not to react. It's to gather the complete picture before drawing any conclusion. The complete picture, I was beginning to understand, was going to take some time. Serena and I had kept a joint account for household expenses since year 2 of the marriage, with separate personal accounts for discretionary spending. It had been her idea. She'd grown up watching her parents argue about money and wanted structural clarity between us. I'd agreed without hesitation. I trusted her, and trust in a long marriage often looks like not looking. I didn't ask about the receipt that first evening, not because the question wasn't forming, but because 14 years of choosing to trust had gradually become indistinguishable from choosing not to see. I understood that distinction only after the fact. At the time, I called it faith. In the 2 weeks following, I began paying a different kind of attention to our finances. Not aggressively, I didn't pull full statements or build spreadsheets, not immediately. I simply started noticing what I'd stopped noticing. The pattern of transfers from Serena's personal account. The mention, in passing, that she'd cancelled her gym membership, $60 a month, without any corresponding conversation about where that money was being redirected. The way her personal spending had a rhythm I couldn't quite map to anything I could see in our shared life. Small observations. The kind that only accumulate meaning when you've already started looking. Her hours had always been long. Director-level marketing jobs in Chicago's agency world ran on late evenings and weekend emails and the particular exhausted pride of people who have built careers out of being indispensable. I'd never questioned the schedule. It was structural, established, part of the architecture of our life together. I realized now, treated her professional world as a domain I didn't need to understand in detail. I trusted her curation of what I needed to know. She had, it was becoming clear, curated with some care. Cassie's tennis tournament fell on the second Saturday in November. Serena had planned to attend but cancelled that morning. A client presentation had moved to Monday and the weekend was suddenly absorbed by preparation. Cassie absorbed the disappointment with the quiet resilience of a teenager who has learned not to make scenes about these things. I drove her to the tournament alone, watched her win 2 matches and lose one in a tight third set, ate a concession stand hot dog I regretted immediately, and drove home in the particular silence of a parent who has done too many of these afternoons solo. Serena wasn't home when we returned. "Still working," she texted. "Almost done." Looking back at that Saturday, the empty passenger seat, Cassie's careful composure on the court, the drive home through November suburbs, I can see it for what it actually was. Not an isolated cancellation, but one data point in a sequence I'd been refusing to read as a sequence. I'd been treating each instance as its own event. A forensic accountant, of all people, should have understood that patterns don't announce themselves. You have to choose to see them. Cassie went to her room. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking at the hallway hook, at my jacket, at the pocket where the receipt had been. Then I walked to Serena's home office. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was doing what I do when a client's books feel wrong before I can say exactly why, moving through the space methodically, without a predetermined conclusion, willing to find either confirmation or relief. Her desk was organized in the way precise people keep their spaces, stacked folders, labeled clearly, a secondary laptop closed and centered, a framed photo of Cassie at 8 years old in a summer dress. In the second drawer, beneath a folder of vendor contacts, I found a receipt book. Paper, not digital. The kind used for tracking when someone wants a record that exists outside of apps and bank statements. 3 pages filled in Serena's handwriting. Amounts ranging from $40 to $400. The entries were labeled with careful vagueness: personal gift, miscellaneous, dinner, personal care. 18 months of entries. Total, just over $6,000. $6,000. Tracked in paper. Paid in cash. Kept in a physical drawer under a vendor folder in a home office. I closed the drawer. Replaced the folder. Went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window looking at the backyard and the tree line of the nature preserve beyond it, dark and still in the November evening. $6,000 over 18 months is not a wallet. It is not a series of generous impulses. It is the financial architecture of something sustained and deliberate. His name came to me the way financial discrepancies always come, not in one sudden revelation, but through the slow accumulation of details that individually mean nothing and collectively mean everything. Serena had mentioned Dominic twice in the preceding year. Once in the context of a commercial development project in Chicago's West Loop, her firm had handled marketing strategy, his architectural firm had handled branding consultation. Once at a dinner party at our friends Mark and Leslie's house, where she'd referred to an architect we collaborated with, who had unusually strong opinions about visual identity systems. I hadn't registered the name either time as anything requiring attention. Professional context. Background texture. When I remembered those 2 mentions, sitting at my desk on a late November evening with a glass of scotch I wasn't really drinking, something clarified that I hadn't let clarify before. I'd been treating Serena's professional world as a closed system. Her stories about work were information she offered. I received them without cross-referencing, without the kind of lateral thinking I applied to every client file that crossed my desk. I had given her, without realizing it, a space where nothing I knew could reach her. I am methodical. It is not a choice so much as a disposition, the way some people are constitutionally unable to leave a loose thread unpulled. What I had at this stage was, one unexplained receipt, one cash ledger spanning 18 months, a name mentioned twice in professional context, and a pattern of absent Saturdays. Hypothesis, not conclusion. I do not act on hypotheses. I began building the case the way I would build any financial investigation. Quietly. Systematically. Without signaling to the subject that anything had changed. The red herring arrived in week 3 and it very nearly redirected everything. Serena's closest friend at work was a woman named Bev, mid-50s, divorced 2 years ago, the kind of person who had accumulated enough life experience to have strong opinions about everything and the frankness to share them without apology. Bev had been in a difficult stretch. Her ex-husband was contesting their settlement, her teenage son was failing 2 classes, and she'd been leaning on Serena heavily for both emotional and practical support. When I found a series of Venmo transfers from Serena's personal account to Bev, 4 of them, totaling just under $1,000 across 6 months, I spent 3 full days believing I had my explanation. The cash ledger wasn't Dominic. It was Bev. Serena was helping her friend through a financial crisis, keeping it private to protect Bev's pride, not mentioning it to me because she knew I would have opinions about the amounts and she didn't want the conversation. It was exactly the kind of thing Serena would do. She was generous in ways that sometimes crossed into excess, and private about generosity in ways that sometimes read as secrecy. I nearly closed the file. What stopped me was the wallet. The wallet was men's, full-grain leather, $312, purchased on October 28 and not present anywhere in our home. It had not gone to Bev. It had gone somewhere specific, to someone specific, for a reason that had nothing to do with a friend's divorce. That moment, when I caught myself reaching for the comfortable explanation, fitting available facts into a shape that would let me stop looking, told me something I hadn't wanted to know about my own psychology. I had spent 14 years being very good at not finishing certain thoughts. Not because I was incapable of finishing them. Because finishing them would have cost more than I was prepared to pay. Denial isn't a failure of intelligence. It's a financial decision. You calculate the cost of knowing against the cost of not knowing, and sometimes, for a long time, not knowing wins. I kept looking. By the end of November, Dominic's firm website, listing him as principal architect, age 46, photograph showing a confident man in a well-cut suit who looked exactly like the kind of person who receives $312 wallets. A LinkedIn connection between Serena and Dominic, established 14 months ago. A charge on Serena's personal credit card, accessible through our shared financial planning software, which she had apparently forgotten gave me red access, for dinner for 2 at a restaurant in River North on a Thursday evening when she had told me she had a client appreciation event. I pulled every statement I could access without crossing legal lines. I was careful. Patient. Thorough. By December 3rd, I had a file. A file, in forensic accounting, is not an accusation. It is an organized body of evidence sufficient to support a finding. The finding has to be airtight, not because you plan to present it to a court immediately, but because you need to know, before you do anything else, that you are not wrong. I was not wrong. The documentation I assembled over the following 3 weeks included 14 restaurant charges on Serena's personal card at establishments I recognized as the kind of places couples went, not colleagues, 6 hotel charges, 4 in Chicago, 2 in Milwaukee, at mid-range properties on dates corresponding to evenings Serena had described as work events or overnight client meetings. The cash ledger entries cross-referenced against a timeline I built from her calendar, which I accessed through our shared family account, and, finally, a set of online purchase confirmations I found by searching Serena's secondary email address, which she had linked to our home network and which populated automatically in our router's connected device log. The secondary email was the piece I hadn't expected to find. It was an account under a slightly altered version of her name, a middle initial inserted, a different domain, that she had created, as best I could determine, approximately 16 months ago. The purchase confirmations in that inbox included the Toomey wallet, shipped to an address in Lincoln Park that I cross-referenced against Dominic's firm's registered office. A cashmere sweater, charcoal gray, men's large. A reservation confirmation for a weekend at a lodge in Door County, Wisconsin, for 2 guests, in September, the weekend Serena had told me she was attending a women's leadership conference in Madison. The Door County weekend was the one that stayed with me. September. 3 months ago. Cassie and I had spent that Saturday at her tennis club and ordered pizza for dinner and watched a movie Cassie had been wanting to see for months. I remembered it specifically because Cassie had fallen asleep on the couch before the third act and I'd covered her with a blanket and felt, in that moment, something uncomplicated and good about being her father. Something I hadn't felt in a while without effort. While that was happening, Serena was in Door County. Even now, that specific Saturday carries a weight the others don't. Not because the betrayal was larger, it wasn't, it was the same betrayal, just geographically confirmed. But because of Cassie asleep on the couch with the movie still running. Because of the blanket. Some memories don't stay abstract. They stay physical, tactile, permanently associated with what was happening somewhere else at the same moment. I also made a call I hadn't planned to make. My sister Patricia, 5 years older than me, a family law attorney in Evanston, received a hypothetical question from me on a Tuesday evening in the second week of December. Not a confession, not yet. A hypothetical. If a spouse had been conducting an affair for approximately 16 months, with documented financial expenditures of approximately $6,000 in cash plus additional credit card spending, and the marital estate included a jointly owned home, 2 retirement accounts, a brokerage account, and 14 years of commingled assets, hypothetically, what would discovery look like in an Illinois divorce proceeding? Patricia was quiet for a moment after I finished. "Ryan," she said. "How long have you known?" "About a month." Another pause. "Have you talked to her?" "Not yet." "Are you planning to?" "When I'm ready." She gave me the name of a divorce attorney she trusted, not her own firm, conflict of interest, and told me to call before I said a single word to Serena. She also told me to stop accessing any accounts I wasn't legally authorized to access, which I had already been careful about. Then she said, "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this." I thanked her and hung up and sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building for about 15 minutes, not moving, not thinking in complete sentences, just letting the accumulated weight of the past month settle into something I could actually feel rather than just analyze. Then I drove home. Made dinner. Asked Cassie about the upcoming tournament. Poured Serena a glass of wine. She thanked me. Touched my arm. Said I seemed tired. I said I was fine. The attorney's name was Gordon, mid-50s, former litigator turned family law specialist, the kind of man whose office communicated competence through its deliberate absence of ornamentation. I met with him on December 9th, a Tuesday, during a lunch hour I'd blocked on my calendar as a client call. I brought the file. Gordon went through it methodically, the way I would have gone through a client's financials, without visible reaction, making occasional notes, occasionally asking a clarifying question about sources and access methods. When he finished, he set it on the desk and looked at me. "This is thorough," he said. "I'm an accountant." I gathered. He folded his hands. "The cash expenditures are particularly useful. Dissipation of marital assets for the benefit of a third party, Illinois courts take that seriously. Combined with the timeline and the pattern of documented deception, you're in a strong position." We talked for 90 minutes. About the marital estate, which was substantial, the house in Naperville had appreciated significantly, the retirement accounts were healthy, the brokerage account held 14 years of disciplined contribution. About Cassie, who was 14, and what custody arrangements were realistic and what I actually wanted versus what I was entitled to pursue. About timing, specifically, about when and how to initiate. Gordon's advice on timing was precise: do not confront Serena before the filing is complete. Once she knows you know, the dynamic shifts, assets can be repositioned, and the element of documented surprise, which in financial terms meant her inability to claim ignorance of the affair's financial dimension, evaporates. I told him I understood. I went home that evening and helped Cassie with a history paper about the New Deal. Serena ordered Thai food, which we ate at the kitchen table while Cassie explained the difference between the first and second New Deal with the slightly exhausting enthusiasm of a teenager who has just discovered that history is actually interesting. It was a genuinely good evening. Cassie was funny and bright and easy to be around, and Serena laughed at the right moments, and I sat at my own kitchen table feeling the specific surreal quality of knowing something that changes everything while the people around you know nothing has changed yet. The filing happened on December 19, 6 days before Christmas. I had agonized over the timing, not out of sentimentality about the holiday, but because of Cassie. Gordon and I had discussed it. The alternative was to wait until January, which would mean 3 more weeks of the current situation, including Christmas itself, which I would spend watching Serena perform normalcy while carrying 16 months of documented deception. I couldn't do it. The calculation was already made. Serena was served on the afternoon of December 20, at her office, by a process server Gordon had arranged. I was at my office when it happened. I know the approximate time because Gordon texted me, "Done. 2:47 p.m. She called me 4 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. I picked up Cassie from school at 3:15. We drove home and I told her, in the car, before we reached the house, that her mom and I were separating. I told her it was not her fault in any way and that both of us loved her completely and that her life, school, tennis, her room, her friends, was going to be as stable as we could make it. She cried in the way teenagers cry when something large hits them, not quietly, not dramatically, but with a rawness that is almost impossible to witness without breaking. I held it together because she needed me to. I pulled over and let her cry and kept my hand on her shoulder and said the things that needed to be said until she was ready to go home. Serena's car was in the driveway. What followed was not a screaming match. I want to be clear about that. What followed was the kind of conversation that happens when one person has been preparing for months and the other has just been ambushed, controlled on my side, fractured on hers. She asked how long I'd known. I told her. She asked what I'd found. I told her, in general terms, that my documentation was thorough. She did not deny Dominic. She asked if there was any possibility of, and I said no, before she finished the sentence, because the answer was no and I saw no reason to let the question complete itself. Cassie stayed in her room. I could hear her music through the ceiling. That conversation, the one in the kitchen with Cassie's music overhead and the Christmas card still displayed on the counter, taught me the last thing I needed to learn from this. Preparation is not the same as readiness. I had prepared for every practical dimension of what was happening. I had not prepared for the specific grief of watching someone you built 14 years with understand, in real time, that it's over. That grief was genuine. It didn't change my decision. But it was real, and I let myself feel it, and I think that was the right thing to do. She moved to her sister's house 2 days before Christmas. Cassie and I had a quiet holiday. My sister Patricia came, and her husband Tom, and we made enough food for twice as many people and ate it at the dining room table and watched Cassie open gifts with a resilience that made me simultaneously proud and heartbroken. The divorce proceedings lasted 7 months. Gordon had been accurate about Illinois courts and dissipation of marital assets. The cash ledger, which Serena's attorney attempted to characterize as informal personal spending, became the central financial document of the case. $6,000 in documented cash expenditures for the benefit of a third party, cross-referenced against the credit card charges and the secondary email purchase history, constituted a clear pattern. The Door County weekend alone, charged to a credit card during a period when Serena had represented to me that she was attending a professional conference, was treated by the court as both financial dissipation and material deception within the marriage. Serena's attorney argued that the marital estate should be divided equally and that Cassie's primary residence should alternate between households on a weekly basis. Gordon argued, with the documentation I'd provided, that the pattern of financial behavior and sustained deception warranted an inequitable distribution, and that Cassie's stability, 14 years old, in the middle of high school, with an established school and tennis program, was best served by primary residence remaining in the Naperville house with me. The court agreed on both points. I kept the house. I kept the larger share of the brokerage account, adjusted for the documented dissipation. Primary physical custody went to me, with Serena having regular parenting time on weekends and alternating holidays. Child support was structured accordingly. I want to be careful about how I describe this outcome, because I am aware of how it sounds, like victory, like vindication, like the satisfying conclusion of a story where the wronged party gets what they deserve. It didn't feel like that. It felt like the only available resolution to a situation that should never have existed, executed as cleanly as possible to protect the people who mattered most. Cassie mattered most. The house and the accounts were just numbers. Numbers I'm professionally equipped to care about, but numbers nonetheless. Dominic, for what it's worth, was not present for any of this. Whatever Serena and he had built during those 16 months apparently did not survive contact with the consequences of those 16 months. I learned this not by asking but by the particular quality of Serena's aloneness in the months after the proceedings concluded, the way she navigated the new architecture of her life without anyone visible beside her. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. I felt, mostly, nothing about it. Which is its own kind of answer. Cassie turned 15 in the spring, the month after the divorce finalized. She had a birthday dinner she'd designed herself, 6 friends, a restaurant she'd chosen, a specific cake from a specific bakery in downtown Naperville that she'd been planning since February. She wore a dress she'd bought with her own saved money and she laughed all evening and she looked, across the restaurant table, like someone who had processed something hard and come out the other side of it still fundamentally herself. I gave her a good tennis racket and a card in which I wrote 3 sentences. She read it at the table and looked up at me with an expression I will not attempt to describe and said, "Dad, you're going to make me cry at my own birthday." I told her that was the goal. That evening, driving home, I passed the Palmer house on Michigan Avenue. We'd taken the train into the city for dinner, Cassie's choice. I didn't look at it as we went by. I used to. For the first year or 2 after the divorce, I had a habit of marking the places that carried old weight, restaurants, streets, the nature preserve behind the house. I had a habit of measuring the distance between what those places used to mean and what they meant now. I've mostly stopped doing that. It's a form of accounting that doesn't produce useful information. What I know, the house in Naperville still has a 3-car garage and a backyard that opens onto the nature preserve. The 3rd garage space, which used to hold Serena's car, holds a tennis ball machine I bought Cassie for Christmas. She uses it 3 mornings a week before school, which means I hear the mechanical thwack of it through the kitchen window while I make coffee, which is a sound I have come to associate with something uncomplicated and consistent. Consistent is underrated. I spent a long time in a marriage that looked consistent from the outside and wasn't. Now I have a kitchen window and a sound I can count on and a 15-year-old who tells me things, actually tells me things, with a directness that I think comes from watching an adult navigate something difficult without collapsing. She asked me once, about 6 months after the divorce, if I'd been angry. I told her yes, at the beginning. She asked what I did with it. I told her I worked. She thought about that and said, "That tracks." It does track. I am, fundamentally, someone who deals with things by understanding them completely. I understood this completely. And then I put the file away. What Ryan's story reveals, at its core, is not simply the anatomy of an affair. It's the portrait of a specific kind of blindness, not the blindness of a naive man, but the blindness of a perceptive one who had organized his perceptions to stop at the boundary of his marriage. The detail that defines everything is his professional identity. Ryan is a forensic accountant. He spends his working life finding what people have hidden inside financial records, the misclassified expense, the off-book transaction, the pattern of behavior disguised as isolated events. He is, by training and temperament, precisely the kind of person who should have seen this coming. And he didn't. Not because the signals weren't there, they were there, and the story shows us each one in sequence, but because he had made an unconscious decision, long before November, to apply his analytical capabilities everywhere except the one relationship where the stakes were highest. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of a particular kind of courage, the courage to direct your clearest seeing at the thing you most need to protect. Ryan trusted Serena not passively but actively, structuring his perception around that trust, treating her professional world as a closed domain, receiving her account of events as the authoritative version. He had, in effect, given her audit rights over her own behavior. No forensic investigation works that way. No marriage should either. The cash ledger is the detail that changes the story's register. $6,000 tracked in paper, hidden under a vendor folder, accumulated over 18 months, this is not impulsive behavior. This is architecture. Serena wasn't conducting an affair alongside her marriage, she was constructing a parallel financial infrastructure to support it. The secondary email address, the cash payments, the carefully vague ledger entries, these required sustained planning, sustained deception, and a sustained belief that she would not be caught. What that belief rested on, ultimately, was her accurate read of Ryan, a man who trusted completely and looked carefully at everything except her. What the court proceedings clarified was something the affair itself had obscured. The injury wasn't only emotional, it was material, documented, and legally quantifiable. Ryan's professional instinct to build an airtight file before acting protected not just his legal position but his psychological one. By the time Serena was served, he had processed the betrayal through the only framework he fully trusted: evidence, sequence, conclusion. The documentation gave him something to stand on when the emotional ground had gone entirely soft. The question the story leaves open, and deliberately so, is what Serena was actually looking for across those 16 months. The gifts, the cash, the careful parallel infrastructure, these suggest not recklessness but investment. She was investing in something. Whether that something was Dominic specifically or simply the version of herself that existed outside the marriage is a question the story never answers, because Ryan never asked it. He understood what she'd done. He chose not to understand why. That choice, to stop at the boundary of what he needed to know rather than pursuing the complete picture of her interiority, may be the most quietly significant decision in the entire story. Cassie's tennis ball machine in the third garage space. That image carries the weight of everything that came after, a space that was emptied by loss, refilled by deliberate choice, now producing a sound that is regular and reliable and entirely his. What stays with me about this story isn't the courtroom outcome or even the receipt that started it all. It's the Door County weekend in September, Cassie asleep on the couch, a movie still running, Ryan pulling a blanket over his daughter while his wife was somewhere else entirely. That moment didn't belong to the betrayal. It was just a Saturday. A good one, actually, quiet and ordinary and real. And the fact that something genuine could exist alongside something so false, simultaneously, in the same life, that's what I find hardest to sit with. We assume that when something is broken, it feels broken. We assume the good moments stop when the truth underneath them isn't good. But they don't always stop. Sometimes they keep happening, real and whole, while everything else quietly unravels. That gap, between what we feel and what is actually true, is the most disorienting part of any betrayal. Not the discovery. The distance between the Saturday and the secret. That distance is where trust actually lives, and where, when it's gone, you realize how much space it used to fill.